Welcome to All Home Care Matters, the show where we discuss all things home care, with discussions on important age-related matters and topics. Brought to you by Enriched Life Home Care Services, the #1 rated home care provider in Michigan by Top Rated Local.
Hello, and welcome back to All Home Care Matters. If this is your first time visiting us here at the show, we want to say thank you for taking time out to be with us today. We appreciate how valuable everyone's time is, and that's why we try and make each episode here at All Home Care Matters something that will hopefully matter to you. Today, we have a wonderful guest, Lori Lemasters, founder of Care Partners Resource and Consulting, as well as the author of You're a Caregiver, Not a Saint. Welcome, Lori.
Great. Thanks for having me, Lance. That was a mouthful, huh?
Yes. And so, Lori, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got involved in this therapeutic journaling and starting the Care Partners Resource and Consulting.
Sure. So, I, like many caregivers, sort of stumbled into this whole caregiving world, right? I was going about my life as a mortgage broker for about 30 years and got that call in the middle of the night from my eldest brother telling me that my mom had survived a massive stroke. And she was the caregiver to my stepdad, who was on dialysis. And so we had to I'm the only one who lived out of state, but I was also the only one who made the choice to go ahead and move in with them and take care of them so that they didn't have to go into a long-term care facility. And that process lasted, my dad was alive for about 3 years after my mom's stroke. And then my mom lived another 5 years. So through that process, there were a lot of emotional struggles, right?
Sure.
That happen when you're caring for a loved one. I had to move 1,200 miles away from my son and daughter-in-law and grandchildren and my support system that was here in Colorado. I moved back home to California. And, there's nothing more shocking as being away from home for about 25 years and then finding yourself waking up in your childhood bedroom.
Sure.
So there's just a lot of emotional things that happen through that process. And I found I had a counselor who happens to use therapeutic writing as a part of her therapeutic process. And she also runs a journaling institute. And towards the end of of my mom's lifespan, she and I kind of decided that we wanted to make sure that her journey through the stroke and everything would not have happened for no reason at all. And so I started my business to help other caregivers.
And, one, you were temporarily a long distance caregiver, then you made the decision to move 1,200 miles, which in and of itself is a journey, I'm imagining. And what would you say, looking back, was the most difficult part of your caregiving journey?
Without a doubt, it was leaving my family first. We're really very, very close, but at the same time, it was a family decision, and there was no question. You go home, you take care of grandma, take care of mom. So there was that. But as far as from the eyes of a caregiver, I would say the most difficult part of the journey was knowing what to ask and finding the resources needed. Because of course I moved back to an area where I grew up, but had never had to deal with any of these type of situations. So it was all, like starting kindergarten. I had no idea.
So what would you then say would be the most rewarding, or what was the best part of your caregiving journey?
The time that I got to spend with my mom.
Okay.
I got married at 18 and kind of moved. My mom and I and dad had a very close relationship, but not proximity.
Sure.
So I moved up about an hour away initially when I got married, and then eventually moved to Colorado. So that really limited our ability to be together and spend time together. So while the caregiving journey was really a challenge and um, uh, really, really difficult. I mean, my mom was left paralyzed on her right side, and she was an expressive aphasic, which means she couldn't use language
Right.
to express herself, although she understood everything, right? So it was a really day to day, it was quite a challenging process. But the positive of that was I had an opportunity to spend time with her and my dad and have some conversations that never would have happened had I not been in the situation that we were all in.
Sure. Sure. So as you're going through this caregiving journey, there are the ups and the downs and adjustments, and some more than others, right? Not everybody
Right.
has to up and, move themselves 1,200 miles or even 300 miles. What was it that led you to finding or discovering this, therapy, this therapeutic journaling during this journey? How did you stumble across that? Or what caused you to find it?
Yeah. So actually, before my mother's stroke, her stroke was in 2001, and it was a pretty challenging year for me personally and our family. And at the beginning or the end of 2000, my ex-husband and I had decided to end a 26-year marriage.
Hmm.
So through that process, I actually found Kathleen Adams, who is a therapist here in Denver, and she is a renowned therapeutic journal writing um, instructor and worldwide known. I actually stumbled upon her,
Okay.
and she uses this process. So I had sort of started dabbling in it initially, and then as my caregiving journey went on, I kind of recalled it and I thought, maybe this could help me in this situation. So I reached out to her, and she started helping me over the phone, giving me some different tips and ideas, things that I could utilize to help me through the struggle, understanding, just trying to identify like what questions do I ask and where do I find help, and then all of the emotional struggle that I was dealing with, being away from my family, my nucleus that was just my heart,
Sure.
and then again just the logistical challenges of caring for someone in my mom's situation.
Okay. Now, during all this, you'd mentioned, your siblings. Were you able at any time to get any support from them or through them as you're relocating and, essentially putting your entire life on hold? You have grandchildren and jobs, and that
Yeah.
I can't imagine, the undertaking that would have been. And like you said, most caregivers, most family members, it's not something that they're really planning for. Oftentimes it just happens and it's a split decision with not a lot of time to decide of, okay, are we doing this? Are we not able to? How were your siblings involved once you relocated and were undertaking this role as your mom's caregiver?
So, the truth is, the funny part of when you're caring for a family member, right, or whomever, we all get the messages that person we're caring for is our loved one, which isn't true in a lot of cases. It was in mine. My mom and I were
Sure.
very, very close, as well as my stepdad. But in a lot of cases, that's not the situation. And a lot of the messaging is, that everybody gets along and it's a beautiful, wonderful situation. Um, I happen to be from my mom's second marriage. My older siblings are all from her first marriage,
Okay.
right? And so there's that dynamic that you add to it. Now, they were very helpful, or tried to be. Um, and they definitely stepped up when I asked them to. The
Okay.
challenge was all of those family dynamics that come into play, being the youngest, being the four of them having the same father and mother, me having a different father, all of that dynamic comes into play, right? And
Right.
so, you know, um, I'm the first to admit that I was not as forthcoming about my expectations of them.
Mhm.
So how can you expect people to meet expectations that you don't voice, right?
Right. Sure.
Um, I'm several years beyond that caregiving experience now, so I can see where my faults lied in that whole situation. And unfortunately, toward the end, after my mom passed, then, typical money stuff came up and so on. So unfortunately, I no longer have a relationship with any of my older siblings
Okay.
through that
And,
process.
and I'm so sorry to hear that, Lori. And not that it's a consolation to anyone, but that's sadly far too common when there are mixed marriages, mixed families.
Mhm.
And, I always like to say, things are perfect at Thanksgiving time. But when it comes to, I call it hospital time, that's usually when you see the differences and these little fractures starting to form that may have been there, but just kind of unspoken. And then they start to rear their ugly head. And, far too many families that I've, witnessed have been, I want to say, torn apart or driven apart or separated when it comes time for, kind of, rubber meets the road, if you will, and things aren't perfect, you're not all gathered around at the holidays. And now real serious life things are starting to happen. And sadly, far too often, those families that are mixed, those differences start to appear. And it's just
Mhm.
unfortunate. It really is because, you know, it's a time that hopefully families come together, not grow apart, right? So that's why I was curious about, how it kind of played out with your family situation. And but you can I'm assuming that at least you can go to bed at night with a good clear conscience that you did right by your mother, you did right by your stepdad, and if others choose not to take that same path, that's on them, right? It's not on you.
Right,
You did your part.
right.
So let's talk about this journaling because I want you to first share the author of the book that you've made. It's called "You're a Caregiver, Not a Saint." Yeah, right. And you have a play on the words like yeah, right. And share that process of how you came to decide. You know what? I need to share this message because of how much it helped me, and how you're trying to help other caregivers and families who are going through maybe not the exact situation, but similar circumstances where they're suddenly finding themselves having to care for a parent or a spouse or even a child.
Right. Thanks. Yeah, I finally the book was like a 10-year labor of love, right? So I had all these ideas and all these thoughts, and I never really pursued them. But I do teach classes to caregivers on, on self-care, and a big piece of that is the journaling. Um, but I just think that the two things that caregivers don't have a lot of are time and money, right?
Right.
And so using a journal to help them identify, just having a safe place to put information down, their feelings, their emotions, some positive, a lot not so positive,
Right.
you know, but understanding that they're very natural feelings and emotions. So the main reason I came up with the name for the book was because I found that so many people put you up on a pedestal when they hear, they haven't seen you in a while and they're like, what have you been up to? Or, oh gosh, what brought you back to California? And I'm like, well, my mom had a stroke, so I moved home and take her. And the first thing they say is, oh my gosh, you're such a saint. I could never do anything like that. Truth of the matter is, most people will. When you're put in
Right.
that situation, most people do step up and do the right thing. I didn't have much of a choice. My mom told me 10 years before something happened to one of her friends, and she was telling me the story, and she said, they put her in a home. Don't you ever do that to me or Glenn, and
Yeah.
I made the
Exactly.
promise, right? Because they were healthy. And I was like, sure, mom, I'd never do that. And then the circumstance comes up. But anyway, I want caregivers to have a place that they can express those feelings, those emotions, those natural um, some days you wake up and you're just like, man, when is this journey going to be over? I can't take it another minute. Those are not things you would express to another person
Right.
without fear of judgment, right? So one of the reasons I kept the book under $10 was because that was purposeful, because caregivers don't have a lot of money. And the workbook in the back is very specific to caregiver situations, and it has prompts and it walks them through to help them, because the one of the main things I hear is, I'm not a writer. I don't journal. I'm not a writer. I can't do that. So this is very specific to help people walk through those struggles that we all face as caregivers.
Well, and for people listening and watching, and they say, well, I journal or I keep a diary, what makes this different than your typical journaling or just keeping a diary or writing down your thoughts? There is a distinction. Would you explain that distinction?
Definitely. The distinction here is that, number one, I teach 18 different types of journaling, which most people don't realize that there are other types.
I would have no idea. Yeah.
Journaling. Yeah. So there's, like you said, keeping a diary or keeping a journal, you just sit down and you kind of write your thoughts, right? Or your feeling at that moment. And most people do it when they're either really happy or really frustrated, and that's fine. I take it one step further in the process, and I have you then, number one, time what you write, because no one should just go on and on and on and on. I always say it's similar to an argument. So you usually get what you need to say out in the first 5 minutes, right? And then if you just keep going, it just gets uglier. Great. So I always recommend you set a timer. Most writing prompts, there's a couple of exercises that take a little longer than 5 minutes, but most should only take 5 to 7 minutes. Then you read what you wrote, and you write for another 2 minutes, starting with something like, reading this, I realize, or reading this, I'm surprised by. And what that does is, the first one is just sort of a dump of feeling and emotion. But when you read what you've written and then write that second piece, it usually gives you an aha moment. Like,
Okay.
oh, this is more about from the time I was 16 and blah, blah happened.
Sure.
It's not usually about that particular instance.
So now, as you're explaining that, the differences between just normal journaling or, recreational journaling or keeping a diary. Now, there are some other caregiver journals out there, correct? Several, yes. And so, but this book is different. So explain for people who maybe last year they, got one as a gift from a friend and said, here, try this journal. You're caring for your dad. What makes your book different than maybe some of the others that are out there? Because it really is a difference.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you an example.
Yeah,
so
please.
In the workbook in the back, it talks about, there's an exercise in here around feelings of frustration and anger and sadness or guilt, right? I describe, why they might feel that way. And then I give very specific prompts around that circumstance. So for instance, I become frustrated when, or I become angry. Why do I get angry, frustrated, or sad when, your loved one does a specific thing? So it's very designed around very specific circumstances that caregivers have. There's a lot of different techniques in there, such as how to write an unsent letter. I have one thing that's called a character sketch. And so it asks you to write very specifically as though someone were watching you, maybe in the grocery store, what the checker may have witnessed, or even sometimes what your pet may be witnessing when you're managing your loved one. Because a lot of times we feel like I'm going to use, this is what I call my caregiver 4-letter F word. We're fine.
Yeah.
right? We feel like we're fine, we're acting fine, we're doing things fine. And we don't realize that there is that emotion does come up, right? And so it comes up in our tone with our loved one or in our behavior. Sometimes we might be a little short with them, or, I mean, it's a natural
Sure.
thing that's going to happen. We don't, just like when we have children, you lose your patience sometimes, and that's okay. But as long as it doesn't go too far, right?
Sure. Of course.
But this process helps you see that more clearly. It helps you look at it from someone else's eyes, and you write it very specifically through all the senses. This is the look on my face, and this is the my actions, and this is those kind of things, so that a person can understand exactly how their behaviors are changing through the caregiving process. And then I walk them through how to take it a little deeper to understand why.
Okay. And so, I'm really fascinated by this because I didn't realize there's over 18 different types of journaling, but you also mentioned that there's different writing techniques. Would you walk us through what you mean or what they are with the different techniques and how that may apply to, family caregivers and caregivers?
Well, sure. Well, a couple of them I've already mentioned. So there's the 5-minute sprint, which is just kind of writing once you have a specific prompt that might be on your mind, or you could grab one from the book. There's the character sketch. There's writing an unsent letter. An unsent letter is a really amazing way to talk to someone, to get your emotions out before you actually have a conversation with someone, like to get the anger on paper so that the conversation doesn't turn volatile, right? Mm. This is great when you're dealing with people that you have expectations of and they're not meeting your expectations. It's a great way to understand, maybe you haven't expressed your expectations and they can't read your mind, or maybe you have expressed them and they continually let you down and you're disappointed in that. A lot of times through an unsent letter, you come to a solution without even having to have that conversation.
Okay.
It definitely not in a volatile way. And it's also a beautiful way to make a gift for your loved one. What this is how you feel about them, or thanking them for the life that they gave you, or the partnership that you've had for however many years or whatever. There is one process technique that I use a lot is called a perspectives write. And this works really, really well when a caregiver is very resistant to self-care, resistant to getting someone in to help them.
And there's that 4-letter word again, right? They're fine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm fine.
Yeah.
I don't need that. Or fear, right? For me, it was that my mom couldn't use words. She said do all day long, thinking she was expressing what she needed, what she wanted. And I would have to remind her, Mom, no, you just told me do. I don't know what that means. And then she would say, I did. And I'm like, yes, that's what came out, right? So you have to, we had a whole process. Is it about you? Do you have to go to the bathroom? Blah, blah, blah. I was very fearful bringing people in and leaving because I felt they couldn't understand her and so on. So I was pretty resistant to that for a long time until I worked out a workaround. So a perspectives write helps a caregiver put themselves into a different perspective, maybe 6 months down the future, and they can pretend like they've already had someone come in and has been helping, right? I've had Lori helping with Mom for the last 6 months, and this is how it's going. And you kind of talk about it. And what that process does is it helps the caregiver see that, hey, everything's okay. Right. They may not do it exactly the way I do it, but my mom's safe. She was fine. It worked out. And that normally will put a caregiver in a place where they feel safer. They're willing to try getting a little bit of self-care.
How long was it, Lori? And I'm assuming, did you ever have outside help come in at any time? How
I
long,
did.
okay, how long was it before you felt comfortable to allow that?
In the very beginning, my mom had a housekeeper who she'd had for several years. And she had two or three different jobs. And so after about sometime within the first year, she witnessed that I was kind of losing it.
Sure.
And she was like, I can leave some of these jobs and I will come and help your mom and help you so you can get away. And I had lots of different, it wasn't like a consistent thing, right? So she would help me, and then I would go with I'm good, I don't need any help for a while, right? I can do it, I'm fine. And then when I moved here to Colorado, I did bring I after my dad passed, I ended up bringing my mom back here so I
Okay.
could be closer to my family. And so then again, starting the process kind of all over again, learning what doctors to take her to, finding a good home health agency, um, which was quite a process,
Right.
Um, and that took another probably couple years to find the right people to come in and help. So, um, like most caregivers, I think it's sort of an off and on process. You bring them in, then you let them go, or you have an exceptionally good experience, so you might keep them for a while. It's just, especially, I mean, I'm so grateful I haven't had to deal with this through COVID.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. We've had a lot of situations where, the families have us going into assisted living or even nursing homes, even hospitals, and we're the eyes and the ears for the family, and also for their loved one, where we're able to go in and help, and yet the family wasn't able to, and it's very, very emotional and very, very difficult on the families and their loved ones, because some of them, they're not aware or able to understand, well, why isn't my daughter coming to see me anymore? They
Yeah,
almost feel like it's something they've done. Just very tragic. So it's fortunate you didn't have to experience or go through that.
right.
But how long was it from the time you moved out there to California to start taking care of your mom to the time you moved her back to Colorado, and then ultimately until you no longer were caring for her?
A total of 8 years.
Wow. Wow. That's remarkable. So
Yeah.
I would say in this situation that is saintly, because I mean, 8 years is a long time. It's a very long time, but I know it was very fortunate for your mom that you were there for her. You mentioned something earlier about, there's two things caregivers typically don't have, and that's time and money. And the time factor also plays into them taking time for their own self-care, their own healthcare appointments, even just their own recreation or hobbies that they take part of. What is some of the different ways you help them to understand the importance of self-care and helping them to make it part of their regular practice?
Yeah. I think my philosophy is very, very different than most self-care educators, because I am a proponent of small chunks,
Mhm.
right? Do what you can manage. So the first thing that I do that is very different than other caregiving experts is I help the caregiver, by using writing, identify what does self-care mean to them, right? It's because self-care, just because you have an agency like yours or someone come into the home and take care of your loved one for, say, 3 hours, um, and you leave, but you're stressed out and worried about them the entire time, that is not self-care.
Right.
That's just, so if self-care, if bringing someone into the home means that you can, and you're not comfortable leaving, stay there. Be their daughter for 3 hours,
Right.
be their spouse for 3 hours. What were some of the things that you guys enjoyed doing together that, you know, um, or that you enjoyed doing around the home? Maybe you like to garden, and you can't really do that if your loved one has dementia and they're at your, following you every second of the way. So you let that care provider entertain your loved ones so you can stay home, go do those things you like to do, but feel safe that they're being well cared for. And as you do that, then slowly you develop a relationship with that care provider. And slowly you start feeling, okay, I can go get my nails done, or I can go for a walk around the lake. You know,
Sure.
it's these baby steps. And I think that we have the misconception that because help comes into the home, we have to leave. We have to go find something to do.
Right.
And we have, everybody says go get a massage, so I'm going to go get a massage. Well, maybe that's not what you think is self-care. You've got to figure that out.
Right.
So that's kind of what I do differently.
Okay. And what about, with your book and the Care Partners Resource and Counseling or Consulting, what are the most common themes you're hearing from caregivers when it comes to their feelings or emotions that they're experiencing through their journey? Is there a common one that you can identify?
Sadly, it's guilt.
Guilt, yeah. And I think that guilt goes back to the self-care too, because we often hear families say, well, I can't leave mom. Well, if you have professional help there, it's as much for your mom as it is for you, and they have that. I feel like a lot of them carry that guilt, and almost they feel like they're being selfish if they go and do something for themselves, or if they're taking care of their health because they feel in some way. And I can understand this too, that I'm neglecting my mom. I can't do that because she needs me. And it goes back to, though, if something happens to you, she's going to need someone else. And if you're neglecting yourself, that ultimately could be a lot worse for your mom than it would be if you go and take that 4 hours, 3 hours in the afternoon, once a month, even once a week, just to go take care of you so that you can come back energized and ready to go and kind of, clear your head for a little while. You need that. And you touched on something we tell families all the time. When you're the full-time caregiver for your loved one, regardless of the relationship, you're there now as their caregiver, not as their daughter, their wife, their husband. And, it changes the dynamic of a relationship dramatically when those roles change.
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely. And it's really difficult to, it was so hard. My mom was such a strong, we're a very big Latino family. In our culture, my mom was the matriarch of our family. My mom was very outspoken and very in charge. And when she lost her voice to be able to be in that role, there was such a huge dynamic shift. And right. I used to tease her and tell her all the time, this journey would be so different if you could talk, because I know you would be scolding me, you would be telling me I wasn't doing this right or whatever. And she would laugh, we would joke about that, but there was an essence of truth to that. I was her baby. And then here I am, not only telling her what's best for her and doing all of these things, but down to the, activities of daily living. Those are very, no one wants to admit someone has to help them go to the bathroom. Someone has to bathe them, all of those things. And so it's just a very different dynamic. So if you have an opportunity as a caregiver to even let someone come in and you can spend that time just being a spouse or just being their child, or parent, just being the parent of that child, that is so valuable.
I agree. And, just to kind of piggyback on that, when people, whether it's family, friends, whoever it is, if they offer to help, accept the help. And if you don't know, some people say, well, I didn't know what I could have them help me with. I didn't know what to say. I always tell people, just write a list, your top 10 things you wish that you could have some help with if offered or given the opportunity. So the next time somebody says, Lori, if I can help you with anything, just call and let me know. Well, now you know what to let them help with. And most people, they're not going to offer if they don't mean it.
Yeah.
and that's one of the big things.
Right, Lance, but I will take that a little bit further.
Yeah,
I
please.
I do something very similar with my caregivers, but I tell them to write everything that they do in a day. Everything. And keep it with them always. Keep one in your purse or in your wallet or in
Mhm.
your car, visible in your home. And when someone asks, hand them the list and let them self identify what they're comfortable doing. Because what I did find is that um, I agree with you 100%. People are not going to offer if they don't mean it.
Right.
But then what can happen is we tell them to do something that they're not comfortable doing,
Yeah, absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And then they may do it once, but then they kind of disappear. But if you let somebody identify something, then they're going to pick something that they're really comfortable doing, and the odds are they will continue doing it.
Hmm.
So, for instance, if you ask somebody if you can provide a meal once a week, I would really appreciate that, which seems simple enough, right? Except maybe you're telling that to someone who actually doesn't cook. They don't even
Right.
cook for themselves,
I
right?
would be
So they're
calling a
like,
local restaurant for takeout. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
absolutely.
So, and also what people I think don't also realize is that you can, when you list everything you do in a day, um, it doesn't have to be caregiver related.
Right.
It can be laundry, it can be mowing the lawn, it can be, you take any of those tasks off your to-do list, and that frees up your time to do something less caregiver or less strenuous,
Sure.
or
Well, it gives
whatever.
you time to do something for yourself.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Lori, one final question I wanted to ask you is, so for viewers and listeners, and we're going to have the links and all of your information here in our show notes for people that want to reach out, or I highly recommend they pick up a copy of the book because I think it'd be very helpful. But if they reach out to the Care Partners resource and consulting, what is the experience like for somebody just reaching out the first time? Walk us through that.
Well, typically I try to do a phone call to find out, really nail down what exactly the challenge is. And then I usually offer them to participate in one of my free Zoom classes, which happen monthly. I actually am lucky enough to have a relationship with Colorado Respite Coalition here in Colorado. They're a part of Easter Seals, Colorado. And so they support me to be able to hold these sessions for free. Um, and if they like the process and everything and want to then do some individual work, we I'm more than happy to do that. I try to design my sessions with people around their personal struggles that they're dealing with, because just a generic, sit down and write for 20 minutes every day, blah blah blah. When you looking at that blank page, there's
Right.
nothing worse than looking at a blank page. And so I really want to help them be very specific around what their struggle is. um, and I'll give you a quick example. Towards the end, after moving here to Colorado, I realized that the best thing for me with my mom was to spend the day with her, to um, do everything that we needed throughout the day, get her ready for bed, put her in bed, with her remote and her TV and everything. And then I would have somebody come into the house um, to keep an eye on her and make sure she was safe. But really, no caregiver duties were required, right? Then I would go out to dinner or a movie or whatever I needed or wanted to do for my own self care. One particular night, I was going to dinner with a friend, and I went in to tell my mom good night with my friend, and say hi and good night, we'll be back, whatever. And my mom started pointing at the clock and doing me. And I kind of lost it. I was like, look, I am 45 years old and I'm going to dinner. You're taken care of. So and so is here if you need anything. Ring the bell. I mean, I just was like really frustrated.
Sure.
And I said, I love you and I'll be home when I get home. And I left. Well, I get in the car and my girlfriend says, man, that was a real overreaction. Your mom just wanted to know when you were going to be home. So of course, that was not self-care because I did not enjoy myself the entire evening, and I get home and I wake her up and I'm sorry, Mom, I love you, blah, blah. Well, when I journaled about it, what I realized was when she did that, I turned into this 16-year-old who always had to be home at 10 when all my friends could stay out till midnight, right? It
Right.
just brought back all of that garbage.
Mhm.
And once I recognized that and realized that, I was able to handle the situation differently. Every time I left the house, I would say, Mom, I'm going such and such, and I expect to be out about this long and I'll be back. She didn't do me anymore, and I didn't leave feeling bad.
Did you ever discover what the doing was? What she was trying to relate with that?
It's an expressive aphasic kind of thing.
Okay.
Some people, it's called persification. So you just, for some reason, her brain just stuck on that word.
Okay.
And when
Was she bilingual?
Uh-huh.
So do you think it might have been something she was trying to say in Spanish, or do you think it was just a random word, no rhyme or reason?
Just a random word, no rhyme or reason. Although, surprisingly, she could say, if she were sitting next to me right now, she could say something like, I like your shirt, or, like, what's that you're talking into? Like,
Okay.
I mean, she could say things randomly. She always could say, I love you, always. And she could sing any Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, any song from her era, word for word.
Incredible. Just incredible. So the last thing I want to leave our viewers and listeners with, Lori, and again, I thank you so much for your time, and I really encourage people to pick up a copy of your book and to learn more about the Care Partners Resource and Consulting, because I think everybody needs that support, and I think they almost, in a way, need that permission to take care of themselves also, and that it's okay to do so. Nobody's going to judge you or criticize you or think less of you. In fact, I think it would be just the opposite. They'd say, they're putting their care for their loved one first by taking care of themselves, right?
So true.
What would be the one piece of advice you'd give to family caregivers listening or watching this interview right now?
That's a good one. I guess that I would say the one piece of advice I have is to trust yourself and your instincts and listen to yourself. So we know when we've had enough, when we need to take a minute, whether that means step outside for 5 minutes and just breathe some fresh air, or go to a movie or whatever. And secondarily, I would say professionals don't know what you need.
That's
You've
true.
got to voice
Yeah.
your needs. And so that means you've got to understand them, right? You've got to figure out, because altogether, too many times we tend to wait for someone to ask us or tell us this is how they're going to solve our problem, but they don't know what our problem is.
Exactly. That's wonderful advice, and I think that could be applied to many facets of life, not just caregiving. But no, Lori, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for your time and to sharing your story and your mom's story, along with these wonderful tips for family caregivers. We look forward to talking to you again in the future, and we appreciate everything. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You're
Have
welcome.
a great day.
Thank you for joining us today here at All Home Care Matters. All Home Care Matters is here to help families as they navigate these long-term care issues. We invite you to visit us at allhomecarematters.com, where there's a private, secure, fillable form where you can give us feedback, show ideas, or if you have questions. Every form is read and responded to. And remember, you can listen to the show on any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms or watch the show on our official YouTube channel. Just make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. We'd also like to thank Ramos Lemasters for joining us today here at All Home Care Matters, and we look forward to seeing you again next time here at All Home Care Matters. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us again on another episode of All Home Care Matters. To learn more about the show and to connect with us, visit us at allhomecarematters.com.